Hey guys, what's up? Why did Flesh and Blood make it as a game? How were they able to do that? Why are so many of these Kickstarter TCGs unable to deliver a product, and the ones that do will probably fail on the short to medium timeline? Why is that? Why is it such a hard industry, and how did Flesh and Blood do it? James White was a professional Magic player, and that gave him the kind of necessary insight into game theory. How do games work? What makes a game exciting? What are the tactical and strategic things in a game that people want? How do you make a game that has expandability for the future and has a satisfying metagame evolution on short to medium timelines? And certainly, James White brought a lot of that skill to Flesh and Blood. That was a critical thing to have because there's no shortage of terrible games out there. All of you probably have a friend or a family member who has a giant room full of board games, and almost every one of them is awful. I mean, most board games that come out are just terrible because there's no play testing, there's no replayability, there's no emphasis in the design on how do we make this really fun. It's never been easier to bring a garbage board game to market, to get it printed, get it published, get it distributed. But to make something that's enjoyable is really hard, and it's the same way in the TCG world. So, you had James White with professional play experience, that helped a lot. Two is, he says that he and his team started developing Flesh and Blood 7 years before it released. 7 years they worked on it. It takes a long time to build a product. They did work like hashing out the lore and who are the characters and what are their stories that they won't release for years. But you need to do that so that you make entertaining story arcs with satisfying climaxes and that you don't have to retcon things in later on. That's all very important. You have to do that work up front before the game releases. You have to do the same thing with game mechanics. And they did a great job with that. If you look back at Welcome to Wraith, the game mechanics were pretty simple. It was the basic go again and some other effects and keywords and things. But then in Arcane Rising, they added more mechanics. In Crucible of War, they added a little more. And they added the light and dark mechanics in Monarch. And so they had a roadmap for how to eventually roll out more of these ideas they had for game mechanics, but not throw all of them overwhelmingly on the players in the very first expansion. And that was just a brilliant idea for handling it. Beyond all of that, there's one other element that has to be considered, and that's when did they release the game? October 11th of 2019, I think, was the release day of Welcome to Wraith. And what happened in early 2020? Well, we had lockdowns, we had governments helicoptering money all over everybody. We had people rekindling their earlier life's love of TCGs. And we had essentially a whole lot of attention and money coming into the TCG space right as Flesh and Blood was starting up as this new game within its first year. And it really helped the game a lot. And I would ask you to do a thought experiment with me here, but think, how might things have been different if Flesh and Blood had just happened to be released 2 years later, October 11th of 2021. And so it puts out Welcome to Wraith in late 2021. In 2022, the market gets sour at Magic, sour at all the products. Investors turn away, players turn away. Things could have been a lot different. The TCG bear market of 2022 may not have been nearly so kind on a young Flesh and Blood that was on its second expansion last summer as the 2020 market was on a young Flesh and Blood on its second expansion in the summer of 2020. And so, when I sit and I think about this, James White and his team did nearly everything correctly, and in the instances where they messed something up, they had the self-awareness to say, yeah, we messed that up. And then they had the humility to say, we'll fix that, we'll change course. And then the changes in course have worked, almost all of them have worked great. But if they had simply released the game 2 years later, they still may not have made it as a TCG. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you look at investing in any of these Kickstarters, speculating on any other TCGs coming out. Look at the environment, because the macro environment affects these things too. It's not just the game. It's the people who are creating the game. It's how much effort have they put into? What have they focused on? What is their roadmap for the future? What is the long timeline roadmap for things like mechanics and play and metagame and competitive play and stories and distribution and everything else, how much are they looking at that? Or are they just so excited that, hey, me and my buddies are making a TCG, that they haven't thought down the road 5 to 10 years? It's important questions, because when we look back at all the history of TCGs, most of them have failed. In fact, almost all of them have failed. And we even look at things like the Alien Predator card game from 20th Century Fox in the 1990s, and that's one of the most illustrative cases. You had a company that had the intellectual property rights to Alien, Predator, and Terminator. They built a game system around it, and then and it would play together with the Terminator cards and the Alien Predator cards. And so you could play Aliens, Predators, Colonial Marines, Terminators, or Human Resistance all together in a game, and it failed. Some of the most popular IPs of the 1990s backed by 20th Century Fox, and it failed. And if that doesn't tell you how brutal this industry is, what else could you say? It's terribly brutal, and most of these TCG Kickstarters will fail. Most will not even deliver a product. Most have no hope, and a scant few might make it on the medium to long term. So for the most part, go back to Flesh and Blood, look at everything they did right, and look at possibly how close they came to still failing. Because I think if they had released their game 2 years later, they might not have made it, despite everything they did right for 7 years before they released the game. Even then, they may not have made it. Let me know what you think, guys. This is kind of a foundational video for my one and only video on Lorcana that I'm going to make sometime in the next couple of weeks, and an answer to a question from a patron. So a lot of things that have just kind of been bouncing around in my head for a while. Leave your comments below. I'd appreciate that, because I don't really know what I expect from this video. So surprise me. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade. Join the Patreon.